Did you know? To date, hospitals reject victims of gunshot wounds or refuse to treat them. Why so? Because the victims must present a police clearance report. This causes at least 1 out of 10 deaths of gunshot victims in Nigeria. Yet, there is a law that orders hospitals to treat gunshot victims even without a police report. So why do hospitals still reject victims of gunshots? Who is meant to enforce the law? What are they doing? You will find answers to these questions in this story. But first, here are very terrible stories of some victims. In January 2020, there was a young Nigerian who was set to wed. A week to his wedding, while returning home, he ran into armed robbers. While they forced to collect his belongings, he struggled with them. They stabbed him, left him in a pool of blood and ran away. Passers-by rushed him to a nearby hospital as he was almost passing away. The doctor refused to treat him, demanding for a police report. The passers-by didn't know where else to take him to. According to the story, the young man bled for close to 3 hours before he died at the hospital. Pastor Femi Lazarus told a familiar story of another victim, a woman. She fell into the trap of one-chance criminals in Abuja. She struggled with them as they tried to collect her items. They stabbed and dumped her on the road. People helped and rushed her to the hospital. The hospital demanded for police reports. None of the helpers was willing to take the risk. They put her on the floor. She died after about an hour. Notice a common trend with the two stories? The hospitals were brutal in their decision not to treat the victims. Why is that so? Doctors say it is because of the terrible experiences that they've had with the police over treating the victims without a police report. It happens more with private hospitals. So here is what happens. Victims of gunshots are rushed to the hospital. The hospital receives them and places them on emergency care. But eventually, it turns out that the police are aware of the victim being treated there. They approach the hospital and allege that they are shielding criminals and enabling crime. The police pick up the doctor who treated the victim and lock them up in detention. The doctor or the hospital will pay to bail out the doctor. You want to ask, why do the police rate their reports over saving the lives of Nigerians? Well, it is all a part of corruption problem in Nigeria. There is a law in Nigeria that mandates hospitals to treat victims of gunshots without a police report. It is interesting that the police who are meant to implement that law are the ones breaking it. What is that law? It is called the Compulsory Treatment and Care for Victims of Gunshot Act. It was signed in 2017 by Buhari when he was in power. Section 1 of the law stated that hospitals must receive and treat victims of gunshot wounds with or without police clearance reports and/or payment of an initial deposit. But there is an objection to this section. It is that when hospitals treat such victims, they must report to the nearest police station within 2 hours of commencing treatment on the victim. It looks as though this section places an obstacle for the implementation of the law. This is because the police uses it to continue the harassment of doctors and hospitals. The law equally mandates all Nigerians to offer any assistance to gunshot victims by taking them to the nearest hospital for treatment. It protects whomever helps the victim of gunshots from being harassed by the police. The law goes on to state punishment in Section 7 for hospitals or Nigerians who fail to obey. It states any authority or person whose omission, refusal to help or treat gunshot victims results in the unnecessary deaths of a gunshot victim shall be liable to imprisonment for 5 years or a fine of the sum of 500,000 naira or both. The Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, FCCPC, is the body that is responsible for handling the cases and implementing the law. What have the FCCPC done in implementing this law and ensuring victims of gunshots are saved? Nothing very reasonable. There has been more cases even after the law was signed in 2017. On the 25th of June 2021 in Oshogbo, Osun State, one Adeloye Moses, a bike rider, fell victim. He was shot on the leg by two robbers he carried in the early hours. Residents helped him to the hospital, but they refused to treat him unless there was a doctor's report. It took a relative of his to contact Yemisi Okpalola, the Osun State Police Command spokesperson, who facilitated a police report before he was treated. The hospital was not arrested nor punished. In July 2019, a certain corps member, Precious Owolabi, who served with Channels Television, was frustrated to death simply because of police report. He was shot while covering the clash between the Nigerian police force and members of the Islamic Movement in Nigeria, IMN. The private hospital he was rushed to refused to treat him. He was rushed to another hospital, but there was no doctor to attend to him. Their next call was the National Hospital in Abuja, but before they could get there, he had died. There are many other stories. Despite a law stopping this, it has continued to fester. Many times, the police and medical bodies have denied this in the media, but it is all lies. For instance, sometime in 2021, the president of the Nigerian Medical Association, Professor Innocent Uja, said that doctors do not need to see a police report or even think about fees before treating a patient during an emergency. Also in 2022, Aliyu Giwa, a police officer in the Force Public Relations Office, FPRO, tweeted on X, formerly Twitter, that doctors must treat patients before asking for police reports. But the evidence on ground do not support these claims by the police and medical bodies, as many more Nigerians fall victims every year, especially in rural areas. A doctor once narrated his experience to a newspaper in Nigeria of how the police arrested him and extorted money from him for treating a patient who suffered gunshots. Initially, I used my discretion in treating such issues, but I stopped after police dragged me to their office and extorted a huge amount of money from me for treating a robbery suspect whose life I wanted to save. Just recently, on August 2nd, the Federal Capital Territory FCT Police Command, through its spokesperson, Josephine Ade, ordered hospitals and medical workers to report to the police the victims of gunshots in the FCT following the #EndBadGovernance protest. This is clearly against the law of 2017. With such directive, how would doctors or hospitals treat victims of gunshots without fear of being the victims?
Free Life Media.